Today, God is our shelter. We can't see him, but we know he's there leading and guiding us. In Moses' day, God led the children of Israel by a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And he spoke directly to Moses about building the tabernacle. The story of the tabernacle begins in Exodus chapter 25, when Moses left Egypt with the children of Israel. There they arrived at Mount Sinai and received the 10 Commandments and instructions to build the temple. God said to the people, "Take donations of gold, copper, silver, acacia wood, material, and let them build a center for me, so that I will dwell in them and not among them." God wanted to dwell in his people. God gave Moses the exact measurements in cubits. Today, 1 cubit is about 18 to 20 inches. For the tabernacle, there was one entrance facing east. Why east, you may ask? Well, the sun rises in the east, and with the pagan worship, many people worship the sun. So when you were going into the tabernacle, you were facing the west, and your back would be against the east. Israel was making a declaration that it was turning its back on all other gods and worshipping the one true God. When the tabernacle was complete, the Spirit of God came to dwell, and a pillar of fire directed Israel during the night, and a cloud during the day. The pillar of cloud was a guide for Israel in the desert. When it was time to move, the pillar of cloud moved. The Levites would take down the tabernacle, and the Israelites would dismantle the camp. When it was time to stop, the pillar stopped, and the Levites rebuilt the tabernacle again, and Israel built the camp around it. That's the way they traveled for 40 years. In 40 years, they moved their camp 42 times. The work in the tabernacle was sacrifices. Why do we need sacrifices? It says in the Torah, because there is atonement through blood. Without blood, there is no atonement for sin. Who was the first person to make a sacrifice? It was God in the Garden of Eden. When Adam and Eve sinned, he covered them with the skin of an animal. An animal had to die for the sin. God sacrificed to atone for man's sin. And from that day forward, the way to God was through blood sacrifice. With this in mind, why is there only one door in the tabernacle? Because there is only one way to God, and it is through the blood of Jesus, or Yeshua in Hebrew, the perfect sacrifice. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me." When we go to God, we go through the blood of his precious Son. Now the tabernacle has 3 parts: the outer court, which the Levites and the priests would go into, the holy place, which the priests would go into, and the Holy of Holies, which was for the high priest only. The first thing you see when you go into the tabernacle was the altar, where the priests would bring their sacrifice. There were sacrifices every day, morning and evening, on Shabbat and on holidays, and on Yom Kippur, the most holiest day of the Jewish year. Yom Kippur is the only day when the blood from the altar was taken into the Holy of Holies by the high priest. This was the day when God forgave the people their sins. On Yom Kippur there was 4 offerings: 1 bull to atone for Aaron and his sons, 1 ram for the sins of Israel, and 2 goats. Aaron had to be forgiven first, because he was bringing the sacrifice for all of Israel, so it was important that he was clean first. He made a lottery for these 2 goats. One was chosen to burn on the altar, and the other was taken into the Holy of Holies, where he would place his hand on the goat's head and confess the sins of the nation. The goat would then be taken out into the wilderness and released, taking the sins of Israel with it. The altar was made of acacia wood and covered with copper. It had 4 horns on it on each side and 4 bars, so that it could be carried. A ramp led up to the altar to protect the modesty of the priest. If it was made of steps and he took a big step, he would show his bare legs. The priest wore long robes and were not supposed to show their legs. Inside was also a copper laver where the priest would wash himself before presenting a sacrifice. The tabernacle was made from acacia wood covered with wool, which was slotted together so it would be easy to set up and take down. The tabernacle had 4 coverings. The first was linen, the second was goat's hair, the third was ram skin, colored red, and the 4th was badger skin. The first cloth covering had 4 colors: white, red, blue, and purple. What's the meaning of these colors? White represents purity, red represents the blood, blue represents heaven, and the purple represents kingship. Each one points to Jesus, the Jewish Messiah, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, who was pure. He came from heaven to give his blood, and now he is reigning on high. In the holy place, only the priest was allowed to come. Anyone else would perish. On a table on the holy place were 12 pieces of bread, one for every tribe of Israel. The bread was replaced every Shabbat. On Shabbat, priests and their families were allowed to eat from it, priests and families only, or they would perish. But King David, who was not a priest, or the son of a priest, came and ate some of the bread, but he wasn't killed. Why was that? He was anointed as a king, but not as a priest. It was because he was hungry. He was running away for his life from Saul. Here you see grace superseding the law. We have the law, but we also have grace. The law is the Old Testament, and the grace is the New Testament. The bread also represents the body of Jesus. Inside the holy place were also the menorah. It was made from 1 talent of pure gold, which is about 37 kilograms. It had 1 branch with 6 branches coming out of it. It had 3 branches coming from each side and was filled with olive oil. This was the only light in the tabernacle. Jesus was the light of the world. Now the priest wore no shoes because he was standing on holy ground. The high priest wore white robes, a blue coat with pomegranates and bells, so that he would be heard and not die, and a breastplate with 12 stones on it, each stone inscribed with the tribe of Israel. On his shoulders he had 2 onyx stones with the names of the tribes, and on his head he wore a gold plate which had written Kadosh Adonai, which means holy to the Lord. All the work of the high priest was holy to the Lord, and when he does his work he carries Israel upon his heart. Jesus is our high priest from the line of Melchizedek. Now once a year the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur, only with the blood of sacrifices. He would purify himself, then he would wear white to be like everyone else. Then he would start burning the sacrifices. First the incense. He would come out, purify himself again, put white on again, take the bull's blood, then the goat's blood. He would sprinkle the blood around the altar, put the blood around the horns of the altar, then he would go into the Holy of Holies through the veil. The veil would be embroidered with the cherubim on it. When Jesus died, the veil in the temple was split in 2 from top to bottom, cancelling out the old system. Jesus' blood was once for all. There was now no need to keep on repeating the sacrifices. Jesus done it all. He paid the price with his blood. Now when a Jewish father has a son that dies, he would rip his clothes in 2. God the Father ripped the veil of the temple in 2 from top to bottom. He was in mourning for his only son. He showed the grief for his only son. But it was the only way for us to come to him. Not just Israel, but the whole world. Inside the Holy of Holies, you would see the Ark of the Covenant, which the blood was sprinkled. Inside the Ark was the 10 Commandments, Aaron's rod, which blossomed, and the jar of manna. Today, Jesus is our high priest. He fulfills everything, and he is interceding for us at the right hand of the Father. Now I met a young man called Adam from England who's been in Israel 9 times. He was here doing volunteer work. I spoke with him and asked him, what have you been doing?
Well, I've been spending most of my time in Eilat, which is right in the south on the border with Egypt and Jordan. And some friends have a congregation there and also a youth hostel. They do different types of outreach from the youth hostel, and it reaches normal travelers and backpackers, young Israelis, and also people in need. Sometimes we have recovering alcoholics or battered women even. So all sorts come through there. And at the same time, the congregation's going, which has around 100 Elatis attending every week.
Mm-hmm. Now, you say you've been working with alcoholics. Is it difficult working with alcoholics in Eilat?
Generally, it is difficult, but it depends also very much on the heart of the individual. And some of them come broken and really desiring for a life change. And these are the people we can work with. Others just pass through, and we try and give them some love and care, but they don't always stop for long. And it reminds me of a guy actually 3 weeks ago. He stopped by the shelter and he spoke to the pastor, and he's in his early 30s, this guy, and a few days later we were all walking to to a congregation on the Saturday, and 2 guys from the congregation found this Russian man, and he was dead under a bush, and he'd been in the midday sun in Eilat for quite a few hours. So it was very disturbing.
Is alcoholism big in Israel?
I think it is big. It's definitely a problem amongst the Russians, the young Russians. They tend to have quite low self-esteem, and they really seem to be searching for a purpose and an identity. They come here from Russia, Hebrew not being their mother tongue, and they're slightly out of place. And some of them, they just don't find their feet, and they get marginalized.
Now, have you been able to work in any other parts of the country?
Yeah, I had an invitation to go and speak with a youth group up in Nazareth. It was really exciting for me because the youth group was made up of half Jewish and half Arabic children. Well, not children, they were young adults.
And how special is that in the land here in Israel?
It's amazing, and you can be speaking to some Jewish people and you tell them about this, and they raise their eyebrows. But for us as believers, it's a real testimony. It's the one new man in Christ, neither Jew nor Gentile, and you see this is God's plan for peace in the Middle East. It's peace in the heart, and that only comes through knowing Christ. And when you see people who know Christ, who worship the same God, and you see the peace in their friendship and fellowship, it's a real testimony to Jesus.
Now you've been in the land 9 times. Is Israel special to you?
Yes, it's very special, and I really think it should be special to all believers. It's the nation from whom we receive the scriptures. Our Messiah is Jewish. He's coming back to this nation, and he hasn't forgotten the people here. And there will be a remnant here. There always has been a remnant. And one day they'll look on him whom they've pierced and mourn for him. And many will receive him. And I think it's important for believers in the West to have this in their hearts. And as Paul says, our faith should be provoking them to jealousy. And it's quite interesting to ask ourselves, are our lives actually something which would provoke Jewish people to jealousy, to want to know our God?
Now, the land is divided between Palestinian and Israeli Jewish. How do we bring these people together in peace?
It's a good question, and I don't think anyone can give an easy answer to that. Ultimately, it will be a work of God, and politicians can spend money and hours and hours debating and legislating, but ultimately it will be a move of God and a brokenness in the heart. That's the peace that God's looking for.